From the headquarters of teleSUR English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South, and I am Soini Gray. We start in Brazil, where massive protests are taking place after the federal judge, Sergio Moro, ordered the arrest of former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. Hundreds of Lula supporters are surrounding the Metal Workers Union in San Bernardo, where Lula has been since the arrest warrant was issued. They say they will not allow the police to take him away. Some of Lula's allies have indicated that he may not obey the judge's order to hand himself in to the federal police in Curitiba by 5 p.m.
We will resist, no matter what the consequences.
It's important because we're in a fight. What is happening to Lula is unjust, and along with other supporters, we have decided to stay here to defend him.
The arrest warrant came after Brazil's Supreme Court narrowly denied Lula's petition for habeas corpus, which would have allowed him to remain free while he fights his 12-year prison sentence for corruption. However, Lula's lawyers have now filed a new request for habeas corpus on the grounds that his detention would be illegal.
It's evident this situation is illegal, and the defense will analyze and verify the possible measure we can take, because this is not compatible with the rule of law. It's not compatible with the federal constitution, because the constitution forbids implementing the punishment before the final and definitive guilty verdict, which does not exist in the case of President Lula.
Overnight, thousands of protesters gathered outside the Metal Workers Union to urge the former president to resist.
During the early hours of Friday, thousands of people held a vigil in defense of former President Lula da Silva, rejecting Judge Sergio Moro's arrest order.
The people must unite to overthrow this government. They tell us they are fighting corruption, but they are the embodiment of corruption.
Former President Dilma Rousseff told supporters that the real crooks are walking the corridors of buildings occupied by Michel Temer's de facto government.
This is part of the coup, which started when they robbed me of the presidency, despite my 54 million votes and 0 crimes.
Many brought their own blankets for the night-long vigil.
There are many corrupt officials in Brazil, but they want to get rid of those who fight for the Brazilian people. If Lula were to become presidential candidate, he will get something like 85% of the votes.
This historic vigil in defense of a social project 30 years in the making and of Brazilian democracy came ahead of a series of countrywide protests that seek to stop Lula da Silva's imprisonment.
Our correspondent in Brasilia, Adriana Rebreño, brings us the latest.
There are big expectations around the arrest warrant issued by federal judge Sergio Moro to detain former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. Right now, Lula is at the Metal Workers Union in São Bernardo, where people are gathering to support the Workers' Party leader. People are wondering if the former president will turn himself in at the federal police headquarters in Curitiba or Sao Paulo, or if he is going to resist and remain at the Metal Workers Union. He has to turn himself in before 5 in the afternoon today, according to the arrest warrant. Lula's political allies say that he should stay at the Metal Workers Union and that if Judge Moro wants him behind bars, he will have to go and get him. Nothing has been confirmed yet, and for now we have to wait for Lula's decision. The former president's defense team presented a new petition of habeas corpus, arguing that the arrest order is illegal since this ignores the period Lula has to appeal in the regional federal court. There is also a lot of expectation around this new petition since there is no fixed date for the court to respond to it. Several demonstrations have begun around the country to support the former president. This morning, people have blocked roads in different states in Paraná, Pará, Bahia and Rio Grande do Sul, as well as outside O Globo headquarters, the media giant that supports Lula's imprisonment.
We thank Adriana for that report. Panama is withdrawing its ambassador to Venezuela and has asked the Venezuelan government to do the same. In a statement, the Panamanian government said The reason for this measure was Venezuela's decision to suspend economic, commercial, and financial relations with certain Panamanian officials and companies for alleged involvement in money laundering. The Panamanian authorities say they are evaluating the impact of these measures in order to identify other possible future actions. Our correspondent from Caracas, Freddie Gillingham, brings us the latest details on this issue.
Well, it seems like this diplomatic spat between Venezuela and Panama has deteriorated and intensified fairly rapidly over the last few hours. It originally all began last week when Panama released a list of around 55 Venezuelan citizens who allegedly had political links. They were tied to various money laundering schemes. Obviously, Venezuela responded quite strongly to this. It comes at a very sensitive time. Various foreign imposed powers have been heightening their attacks against Venezuela. They're dealing with various economic sanctions coming from all angles. They probably saw this statement by Panama as a sort of encouragement of that within this region. Venezuela responded. They suspended economic relations with around 46 companies and 22 citizens. That includes the Panama president. Various tit-for-tat moves followed. Panama has withdrawn its ambassador and vice versa. Quite a interesting and slightly ironic development came out today. Antonio Ledesma, a former mayor of Caracas, a sort of strong figurehead of the opposition, has declared that Panama might possibly suspend Venezuela's use of the Panama Canal. Why he came out with this, it seems to follow on from the fact that Venezuela suspended the Copa Airlines, which is a Panama flight airlines company. Why Ledesma is saying this, he's not even involved in the politics of he's not even in the country anymore, but he is, of course, aligned to Trump and aligned to the angle of regime change in Venezuela. All of this comes, obviously, at a very sensitive time. Panama is, of course, one of the 12 countries of the Lima Group. That Lima Group are expected to be meeting next weekend with Trump in the Peruvian capital. Of course, Panama will be there. We still don't quite know if Venezuela will be there. They are obviously piling on the pressure not to welcome the Venezuelan president. But this incident with Panama obviously fits in very perfectly with that big meeting next weekend.
Thanks, Freddie, for that report. President Nicolas Maduro has responded to French President Emmanuel Macron's comment that May's election in Venezuela would not be free and fair. Maduro also spoke about the Summit of the Americas in Peru next week, saying that attending is not his priority. He said some countries are conspiring to topple him and take control of Venezuela's oil resources.
Macron is destroying France. Macron was put into the French presidency to act as a hitman. Macron is a hitman for the interest of the financial oligarchy to destroy the social rights of the people of France. We are evaluating it. For me, it's not a priority to go there. The Summit of the Americas is a terrible waste of time. You know, there's nothing discussed there that has anything to do with the lives of our people.
Social movements are organizing a People's Summit as an alternative to the U.S.-backed 8th Summit of the Americas. Activists are concerned that the official summit will try to revive the Free Trade Area of the Americas, or the FTA.
It's been 13 years since social organizations and progressive governments in the region decided to bury the Free Trade Area of the Americas.
Each of us brought an undertaker's shovel to dig the FTA's tomb here in Mar del Plata.
Vamos a decirlo. Alca, alca, al carajo.
4 summits later, in a different geopolitical scenario, the U.S. government is trying to revive the FTA.
The FtS did not completely die. It's been reassembled by the Pacific Alliance, and now, at the Summit of the Americas, they want to completely revive it. That former animosity or opposition to what is a free trade integration project has been somewhat reversed. This is, without doubt, thanks to certain geopolitical operations in Brazil, Honduras, Paraguay, and other countries.
Latin American activists agree that while the White House has been busy reorganizing its backyard, using all the media resources at its disposal, social movements lowered their guard and neglected their joint continental action. Now, at the People's Summits to be held in parallel with the Heads of State Summit, they aim to reformulate their agenda.
This alternative summit gives us a chance to sit back surrounded by social movements, by popular movements, and establish communication channels. Governments and right-wing groups coordinate. They are well articulated, and so they can sign free trade treaties. On the other side, the people and their organizations are a little more introverted in their sectoral agendas, and you can see this clearly in Peru.
The organizing committee of the People's Summit say that in the final agreements of the meeting, they will promote socio-political integration through spaces such as Union of South American Nations, UNASUR, and the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, CELAC.
That story took us to the break, but join us again after a look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting.
A meu respeito, devolva a minha inocência, porque eu quero ser candidato.
Vamos começar assim. Golpistas, fascistas, não passarão! Golpistas, não passarão! Golpistas!
Welcome back. Ecuador's President Lenin Moreno says the rescue of the two kidnapped journalists and their driver is a top priority for his government. At a meeting with journalists, Moreno said he is making every effort to bring the three men back alive. The kidnappers are demanding an exchange with three of their members imprisoned in Ecuador. The journalists and their driver were kidnapped in the community of Matahe after they crossed a military checkpoint on their way to the border with Colombia. And President Moreno has announced new measures to protect the border with Colombia. Our Quito correspondent Denise Herrera has more.
In a press conference, President Lenin Moreno and the Interior Minister Cesar Navas announced the new measures to protect the Ecuadorian border close to Colombia. One of the main points was the creation of a security council. Another was to strengthen the bilateral agreements between Ecuador and Colombia, among others. The Interior Minister Cesar Navas also confirmed 9 people have been arrested in connection with these recent attacks in the border. He also confirmed these people are dissidents of FARC. The families of the 3 workers of the commercial newspaper, Javier, Efraín, and Paul, they will gather outside the government palace to continue fighting for their release. It's all for now. We will keep you posted with more information as soon as we can. Back to you at the studio.
We thank Denise for that report. The FARC new political party in Colombia is calling on citizens to support the pro-peace agreement candidates in the May elections. The former guerrillas have also asked Colombians to vote for those in favor of the agreement to guarantee the peace process. They say they will continue to defend the agreement and abide by its commitments. As part of the peace deal, the FARC is guaranteed 10 seats in Congress. They say they will reinforce democracy and help the poorest in the country. The Colombian National Liberation Army, or ELN, has invited presidential candidates to participate in a roundtable debate. The lead negotiators say peace is one of the biggest issues for the Colombian people and should be at the center of presidential campaigns. Mexican President Enrique Peña Nieto gave a sharp rebuke to U.S. President Donald Trump in response to his plans to send the National Guard to the U.S.-Mexican border. In a speech to the nation, Peña Nieto urged Trump to stop his threats. He added the president's complaints were the result of his own frustrations while running his own country.
President Trump, if you want to reach agreements with Mexico, we are ready. We are always willing to talk in a serious way, in good faith, and with a constructive attitude. If your recent declarations are caused by your frustration over issues of domestic policies, your laws, or your Congress, then address yourself to them, not to the Mexicans. We will not allow negative rhetoric to define our actions. We will only act in the best interest of the Mexican people.
Trump's threats have raised a wave of outrage in Mexico. It has also united political parties to defend Mexico against the U.S. president's attacks. The Mexican Senate demanded the Mexican president suspend cooperation on security and migration with the United States. It has also become an election issue. The frontrunner candidate, Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, accuses Trump of using Mexico as a tool to gain support from his conservative base.
It worked for Trump among the electorate. This anti-Mexican policy has worked politically because, unfortunately, there are conservative sectors in the United States with little information, and he knows how to awaken an anti-Mexican sentiment. This great threat on the southern border of the United States that he says is there does not exist. I can prove it and make the argument about it. The Texan border city of Laredo has the least violence if compared to other cities in the United States. There is more crime in Washington than there is in Laredo.
Social groups are protesting in Mexico amidst a severe economic crisis in the country and are calling for more help for those most in need.
Workers, union members, and associations of retirees and neighbors marched toward the Chamber of Deputies, asking for a popular legislation model.
This is about turning people's demands into laws. We tried to get this into Congress, despite the traitors working in there. Together, neighborhoods, towns, and communities are gathering signatures for this.
It's being led by the National Association of Electricity Users, who reject the increase on electricity tariffs and privatization.
What they call modernization is really privatization, and we don't know they have already sold this to many companies, most of them from other countries. We don't agree with that.
Another great concern is the negative effects on jobs and low pensions. People are calling for reform of the national pension law.
Almost 6 million people will receive no pension in the next years, and some others, around 3 million people, will only receive a pension lower than the minimum wage, which is the same as $100 a month.
This problem motivates people to act against poverty, lived by more than 60 million people, and against the government's attempts to declare social protests as crimes, with laws like the security one that was approved at the end of 2017. They say that elections have distracted the political class from issues that affect Mexican people. According to the organization Latino Barometro, 70% of people don't trust in the upcoming elections set for the 1st of July.
Bolivia and China are taking steps towards a trade agreement that could have a huge impact on Bolivia's economy. Our correspondent in La Paz, Freddy Morales, has more.
Bolivia's and China's technical committees are making progress in laying the foundations for what in this country is being seen as an extremely important trade agreement, including the sale of food products to the Asian country. A visit by quality inspectors and quarantine officials from China has been confirmed for mid-April. They will come to Bolivia to evaluate the system of production and the quality of exports of Bolivian coffee and quinoa. Both countries are also analyzing the future for exports of beef and soy. These initial contacts should lead to the completion of a trade agreement. Next June, officials from both countries will meet again to finalize the agreement during President Evo Morales' official visit to China. Given the size of the Chinese market, with more than 1.3 billion citizens, achieving this deal is seen as revolutionary for Bolivia and for its agricultural production. Bolivia and China have a trade balance, which has been, for 5 years running, negative for Bolivia. The official data shows that in 2017, exports from Bolivia to China amounted to $401 million, while exports from China to Bolivia reached $2.27 billion, a deficit in Bolivia's trade balance of $1.6 billion. With this new trade agreement, the two countries seek to improve their economic cooperation.
In Guatemala, delegations from 20 countries have gathered in the city of Antigua for the first regional summit of indigenous leaders of Ibero-America.
During the summit, indigenous leaders talked about the main issues they have to deal with. Migration is one of them.
Migration has been happening for more than 20 years. Young indigenous people are leaving their territory because it lacks opportunities.
Extractivism affects their crops and cattle, and that's another factor that forced youngsters to leave their communities.
We demand respect for our lands and for our rights, because that's where we used to live, and many companies have tried to take our land from us.
The summit is also a way for indigenous peoples to stand together and fight for their rights.
They will listen, but we must stay together for that. They won't if we split.
I think that one of the main problems we deal with as young people and women is that our rights are constantly violated, and we are not respected for what we are, indigenous people.
According to the UN, 50 million indigenous people live in Latin America and the Caribbean. After this meeting, they already plan to present their demands in the next Ibero-American summit, which is set for November.
We're going to take another break, but join us again after a look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting.
I'd love to see a young girl go out and grab the world by the lapels. Life's a bitch. You've got to go out and kick ass.
Welcome back. 2 more Palestinians have reportedly been killed by Israeli forces as new protests begin on Gaza's border with Israel. 80 Palestinians were wounded as heavily armed Israeli forces fired at protesters. Thousands of Palestinians have gathered at the border to resume their march of return. This comes a week after at least 20 Palestinians were killed by the Israeli forces. Demonstrators are demanding that Palestinian refugees be allowed to return to their ancestral lands. They are holding a 6-week-long protest along the fenced border. Now let's have a look at some of the other headlines making news around the world.
Salisbury District Hospital in the UK has issued a statement saying former Russian double agent Sergei Skripal is improving rapidly and is no longer in critical conditions. Sergei and his daughter Yulia Skripal were allegedly poisoned a month ago in Salisbury. The statement comes a day after the hospital said her condition is stable. Britain has blamed Russia of using a nerve agent on the duo, while Russia has denied any involvement. Ex-South Korean President Park Geun-hye has been sentenced to 24 years in prison with a fine of $17 million by the Seoul Central District Court. She was found guilty on multiple counts of abuse of power, bribery and coercion. 66-year-old Geun-hye became country's first female president in 2013. She was impeached and arrested in 2017 on corruption allegations. The government televised her verdict due to wide public interest in the case.
I'm glad that I was able to watch the verdict live on television as a citizen of the Republic of Korea. I had hoped that the former president Park Geun-hye attended to the hearing. It is a shame she was sentenced to 24 years in jail, but I was expecting more years.
In another graft scandal, former South African President Jacob Zuma has been charged with corruption linked to a $2.5 billion arms deal in 1990s. He faces 16 charges including fraud, racketeering and money laundering. 75-year-old Zuma was ousted from office in February this year. He has denied any wrongdoing.
To the end of this news brief, but for these and many other stories, you can find them on our website at telesurtv.net/English. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Sony Gray. Thank you so much for watching.